I try to kind of start from the beginning. So, do you remember your like earliest experiences with music?
With music or with hip hop in general?
Music.
Yeah, actually, I was super young, like maybe 4 or 5 years old. Just basically like being really in tune with like the music that my parents were playing around the house.
Mm.
Um, I remember one of the earliest Christmas gifts I got was like a Sesame Street turntable, and yeah, I used to like the digging started early. I was maybe like 3 or 4 years old, like stealing my sister's records and my mother's records and fucking them up, scratching them. I didn't, so that was the earliest memories. It ranged, the type of music range was huge at that point. As my parents were like really into the Beatles, um, some soul, some rock, some stuff like Three Dog Night. It's kind of all over the place,
Yeah.
which I guess kind of shaped my music interests later. So,
Was there any musicians in the family?
yeah, my uncle, he's still a musician. He plays a million instruments. My cousin, he's a guitarist. My other cousin, she's a singer. No one in my immediate family, like my parents weren't musically inclined. My sister never really, I mean, she played piano, but not
Mm.
like seriously.
Mm. And what about yourself? Were you playing any instruments?
Um, yes and no. I mean, I took piano lessons when I was young, um, and I really wanted to learn to play piano, but I kind of hated having to practice. So, like, literally, I'd be that kid who wouldn't practice all week, and then like an hour before my piano teacher was coming, I was like, all right, let me practice now. So, I don't really. I mean, I gained some things from it for sure, but
Mm.
I wouldn't say I played an instrument. I also played in fourth and fifth grade. I took up saxophone, so I had 2 years of saxophone, which really means, in the grand scheme of things, means nothing because if you handed me a saxophone right now, I wouldn't even know where to start.
So then, what about hip hop? When did that come? Or do you remember your earliest memories of hip
I
hop?
remember the very first time I heard anything hip hop. Very vivid. Um, I was living in Long Island. It's where I grew up mostly, and we had like a basketball hoop in their driveway. So I was just outside shooting baskets as I always did, and I heard something coming from my sister's room, and immediately I was like, "What the fuck is that?" And it was beatboxing. It was a group called the Disco Three, which later became that sound I had never heard before. And I literally went inside, and my sister and I weren't didn't really get along, so I just kind of like waited until she left, and then went through all her records until I found which one it was, and that was the earliest memory of hip hop was Disco Three.
Do you remember how old you were?
Um, I had to be, I would guess, around seven,
Mm.
7 or 8, I guess. Wait, I had to be. It had to be before, probably third or second grade. So
Wow.
however old you are in second or third grade.
So I guess a few years before hip hop really blew up. Then.
Oh yeah, this was way before hip hop blew up, for sure. It was still very. This was before, I believe, Rapper's Delight took off,
Mm.
and yeah, no one even knew what hip hop was really. It was just kind of like the beginnings. Like, I can seriously thank my sister for it, and it was certainly a time where the people that did know of hip hop kind of all hated it.
Really?
It was just kind of well, just the general population. Like it wasn't allowed. Like there were literally rules in place where they were not allowed to play hip hop on the radio until only on the weekends. It was Friday and Saturday night and after 9 p.m. Like these were just hard set rules. Yeah. And this is New York, like the birthplace of hip hop. So, it was definitely a counterculture. And yeah, I mean, it was a interesting time to grow up. I mean, looking back at it now, it's interesting. Back then, it was just how it was.
So by the time, say, you got to like high school, a little bit different, I imagine.
Oh yeah, very different. High school was, I mean, it still was it was still a very much a looked down upon by the general public, and it wasn't on radio during the day still. But I graduated high school, to give you a time frame, in '89. So that was like Big Daddy Kane, Cool G Rap, Juice Crew, it was that era. So it was really starting to kind of get more involved and more, it was blowing up, like this. I don't think Yo MTV Raps had started yet. I think that started when I was in college, but it was just starting to get that kind of national real recognition. And then West Coast groups started popping up, and it was really, a good time to be a DJ, which I was. So, I was there. There were a few DJs in my high school, and we were like somewhat responsible for bringing hip hop to our community, because we would DJ a lot of stuff in the city. And it's hard to explain. Like Long Island life is, I mean, it's very different now because every information is readily available. But back then, people from the city dressed differently than people from Long Island. They listen to different music. They use a different vocabulary. It was just very different lifestyles. And there were those of us who, it's a short train ride to the city. But, as a kid growing up in the suburbs, you don't know that. But there were a few of us who we regularly DJ'd spots in the city. So we'd bring back all the style, the culture, the talk from, Brooklyn, from Manhattan, the Bronx, and bring it to our little town in Westbury, Long Island.
What got
Mind you, I mean, it was already there. I mean, I don't want to sound like we were like pioneers and the only people to bring it there, but specifically for our generation and our high school, we were definitely the kind of the curators of that entire movement.
And what got you into DJing?
That's a good question. I don't know. Like I originally started off rapping, but I never really took it seriously, and I always wanted turntables. And actually, there was one moment that made me want to make beats, and I just didn't know how to go about it. So DJing was like the logical step. And me and my friends, we threw parties and we DJ'd, and I was always into, even before I was DJing, I was into records. Like I already had amassed a collection because I'd been buying records since I can remember. Like I'd be the kid that I wouldn't eat lunch at school for like weeks just to save money so I could go to the mall to buy records. So, yeah, I mean, I just kind of, I guess seemed just like the logical step. And I remember the day I got my turntables. I got some really cheap Gemini turntables. And of course, everyone knows you need Technique 1200s, but I'm like 14 years old and they were like $400 a piece. So I was actually working a job at 13 at a bowling alley, basically flipping burgers. And I saved enough to get 2 turntables and a mixer. And I went to the store that's called The Wiz. It doesn't exist anymore. And I bought the 2 turntables and the mixer, came home, and I was like, these suck. because a friend of mine had 1200s, and I'm like, I just spent $400 on these shitty turntables. So I went back, returned them, and then I worked another 2 weeks, saved enough money to buy one Technique turntable and a mixer. And then it wasn't like a few months later until I got the second one. But that was the start of it. And I just kind of DJ'd for myself and my friends and made like mixtapes. And then I don't even know how the first party happened, but that was a big realization for me. It was like what a DJ actually did. Like, because, you know, a DJ, your only job as a DJ is to keep as many people in the party happy as possible. And, you know, you can't just sit up there and play the shit you want to hear.
Yeah.
Which is what we did the first few parties. And that shit did not go over too well. But then you figure it out, and then you get kind of a reputation of some sort that people know what to expect. But yeah, it was valuable lessons learned in those early days for sure.
Do you remember what you were spinning at all? Like,
Well, there were two of us. I specialize in the hip hop stuff. My boy, he specialized in reggae, and then we both also DJ'd house music. Because back then it was also a very different thing. Is that any party you went to, you had to hear reggae, you had to hear hip hop, you had to hear house, and you had to have some like soul classics thrown in there. Just had to. There was no ifs, ands, or buts, because in order to please the crowd, that's what people wanted to hear. And I mean, I loved house music also back then too. It was a very different scene. But if you're asking like specific like groups and stuff that I'd spin, I specifically remember one party we threw in Westbury where I had just gotten the main source Faking the Funk 12-inch, and no one had really heard it yet. And I remember putting that on, and the party went fucking crazy. And I was like, oh, really? Like, I mean, I love the song, but I didn't even think anyone would know it or like it. But I was like, you know, it was an interesting experience to drop a song that no one's heard and see them go crazy for it. And that's one that stood out. Still love that song to death.
So you said you DJ'd with another guy. Was there like were you involved in like any type of scene at all? Like
like a crew?
Yeah, or like talk. Was there like other guys you went to for like advice, or looked up to other DJs?
You know, like I didn't have that. I had peers. I didn't have like I kind of wound up being that role for a lot of people. The older guy that had done it before. A good friend of mine, I'm still friends with him. I met him when I was in first grade. He was the first person I knew that had Technique 1200s, and he had family in Philly. And everyone back then knows that Philly was like the birth of all these crazy battle DJs. So he was the first person I actually saw like do tricks and scratches and stuff like that. So I used to hang out at his house a lot. But I wouldn't say that he taught me much. I just kind of sat and observed. And but yeah, I mean, we were exactly the same age. We were in every class literally from first grade until the day we graduated high school.
Wow.
So yeah, I've known dude forever. That's the closest I could say in that role. There was my boy who I DJ'd with, my boy Saf, also still good friends with. His older brother didn't influence us, but he was like, the cool kid that you wanted to be at that young age. Like, we're 13-year-old and he's like 18, 19. He's got a car, he's got a BMW, he's got all the chicks, and he's a musician. He played saxophone. He was the first person who I saw that had a sampler. never saw him use it, never showed me how to use it, but I knew what it did, and I knew I wanted it, and he was cool for having it. So like that's pretty much as far as it goes, as far as like a mentor goes.
And then I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I seen that pic in your dorm room. That looked pretty sick. It's like you have your turntables. So you continued that into college.
I DJ'd pretty much every party on campus and a bunch off campus. I went to school in Connecticut. So again, like New Yorkers, we are a very arrogant species. Like we just, no matter where we go, we just feel like New York is better. And looking back, it was just kind of senseless. But I immediately became friends with the other New Yorkers on campus, and we were like, "Yeah, we're gonna fucking take over this school," and started DJing parties. And it was basically because we were city. Well, I wasn't a city kid, but to them, I was a city kid, and I was still going to clubs in the city, make the drive from Connecticut. And just bringing that slice of New York there, it was great times for sure. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about those times. It was also, that was when I first started really making beats in 1990. My roommate was a guitar player. And he was like heavily into like the rock scene, so I got put onto like a lot of bands that I would have never have known because of him. Specifically Nirvana. He put me onto Nirvana, and I was like, "Oh shit, this is insane." Yeah, I totally forgot what the question you asked was. Hopefully, I answered it in there somewhere.
Yeah. Mentioning, were you receptive to other types of music, or were you kind of like, I like what I like?
No, I was always pretty receptive, because like I said, my early days, like it was just about hearing anything, any record that I could get my hands on. I would take it in my room and ruin it on my shitty turntable. But I think it really there were some forms of music that I didn't care for, and that I learned to appreciate later. Like I never really liked classical. Now as an adult I can appreciate it. And I fucking hated doo-wop because I realize now why, because my father is insanely into doo-wop. Like my father and we'd collect records together. Like that'd be our, other people's parents go out and they throw a ball together. My father still collects records to this day. And we'd go to like record shows and buy records together, and he'd go off into the doo-wop section, which I would never even want to touch. And he'd see me buy all these records, and I tried to explain to him sampling, and he's like, "Why don't you ever sample doo-wop?" I was like, "No, Dad, I can't touch. I just can't touch that shit." But yeah, I still kind of have this weird aversion to doo-wop. I know it's actually good music. I like the second it comes on, I'm like, "Oh, I'm good." But yeah, no, I mean, I collected records from any genre at the time. And the second that I found out that the beats were sample based, which is another thing I remember specifically the moment that happened, was when my mind kind of opened up to like, I need to listen to all of my parents' records. Because I was listening to, like I said, hip hop was only on after 9. It was a radio show, DJ Red Alert, on Saturday nights on Kiss FM, and they played. He was managing the Jungle Brothers, so he played a lot of the Jungle Brothers stuff. And I don't know if you're familiar with the song "I Got It Like That." That came on always, and I used to record, tape every show, and I loved the song. I found the vinyl in the city. I bought the vinyl, And I kept thinking to myself, this shit, it sounds familiar. Like, I know I've heard this music before. And then the light bulb went off, and I dug through my parents' collection. I found the Sly and Family Stone record that the sample was taken from. And then I was like, now I understand how they do this.
Mm.
So that was when, like, me searching for stuff to sample started. And this was before I even knew what a sampler was. So I'm like, I'm going to find stuff that I can rap over. And that was when that obsession started. And that was a good 4 or 5 years before I ever even owned a sampler.
Wow. So when did you end up getting a sampler?
I went through different phases with that. The first phases of making beats was, which I'm sure you've probably heard of the technique of making pause tapes.
Yes.
Okay, so I started off doing pause tapes. You know, you'd have 2 tape decks, and you'd sit there and pause and make a loop, and then you'd have one tape that had the drums on it, and then you play that, and then you try and match the bass line to that. It's a tedious process, and it sounded like the sound quality was shit, and if you messed up like 30 seconds into it, you either had to start over or just deal with having something offbeat.
Mm.
So that was the first step. Then I saw a commercial for, actually, one of the other big things, which is really odd, that opened my mind up to what sampling was and how I could use it was randomly Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Because there's a scene where he has the sampling keyboard.
Yeah.
He's playing him coughing, and I'm like, oh, that's what I need. That. So then I saw a commercial for a Casio. I think it's a CZ1. It's like an early sampling keyboard. It's really a toy, and I asked for that for Christmas, and I got that. And basically, you could sample for like a second and play it across the keyboard. So that was my first sampler, which I tried to make music with, but it just didn't work out. And then after college, I was working a few jobs in college, and I remember it was 1989, the end of 89 going into 90, where I bought an Akai 950.
Mm.
And that was the first real sampler I had, and I bought it without knowing anything except that it was what DJ Premier used for the first Gangstar album.
Mm.
So I bought that just like, all right, that's what he used. I'm going to find one. And I found one used for $450, and I drove like 4 hours to go get it. Got it home, and I don't know if you know anything about samplers, but you can't do anything with it by itself. There's literally nothing you can do except sample something, and that's it. You can't loop. There's nothing. It's like you need a controller, a MIDI controller. You need a sequencer, which I didn't find out until I spent all that money. And it just literally sat in my house and collected dust. And I read the manual a million times, and then I would just take like daily trips to Guitar Center, and actually, no, it wasn't Guitar Center. It was Sam Ash, which is a music store, and try and find someone there that knew how to use it. And I found one guy, and he kind of pointed me in the right direction. And that was when I got my first sequencer and my first MIDI keyboard, so that I was actually able to make beats. So, I mean, that was over the course. I mean, it sounds like a long thing, but it was over the course of maybe 6 months to a year, where it took me 6 months to be able to use the sampler. But that was when the beat making really started.
I actually have an S950, and
so you understand.
yeah, but it took me a while to figure it out, and I have the access to the internet, so I can only imagine.
Yeah, oh yeah. There was no internet. Our internet, and this is another huge thing. I don't even know how. Like I'm can be pretty lazy, but I did so much shit then that I'm like, how did I figure this out? I used to drive to Tower Records, go to their magazine section, and basically just sit there like it was a library and just read every recording magazine, keyboard magazine. I don't know if I was retaining any of the information, but I just do it for fun. And yeah, I still have my S950 actually, still working, same one. Yeah, I love that thing to death.
Um, Sorry, one second. So, this is like, do you mind if I ask you what you majored in college?
Not at all. There were multiple things. First thing was computer science,
Mm,
mainly because I thought that that would be my path to make video games. And
okay.
yeah, that didn't last very long. Um, did it for about a year and a half before I decided to call it quits because, I didn't really know much about college. I'm like, all right, let's
Mm,
go to college. Let's do this because that's what you do. And, I was given like 21 credits my freshman year every semester, and it was just too much, like
mm,
for me to realistically do and have a life. And I wanted to have a life, so I kind of really fucked up my first year.
mm,
And when I hit my first like programming classes, I was like, this is not what I want to do. And I switched to a business major, really just because I didn't know what else to do.
mm.
And I just was like, all right, let's business management. That's, you know, generic enough that I can get a job. I have no real interest in it. I mean, the flip side of it is when I did start a business, like my label later, it helped a ton with that.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I mean, I didn't realize it was helping until I got into situations where I'm like, I remember this from marketing, and I was like, oh, I still have my textbook. Let me go read some stuff, and like, it definitely helped. It made me wish that I could have turned back the clock and actually paid more attention in class and asked the
Mm.
right questions. But
'Cause
that,
go ahead.
yeah, but that's, I figure that's a typical experience for pretty much anyone in college.
Yeah,
You know, it who really pays that much attention when you're 18, 19-year old,
yeah.
when, there's girls and parties and things like that going on.
Because I was gonna ask, you were you were pretty involved in music at the time. Did it ever make you? Uh, did you ever give any thought to doing something with music or recording or?
No, I never, as far as school, you mean?
Yeah.
No, looking back, I wish I would have.
Mm,
I wish I would have done either music or film. Um, but like I come from a family of educators. Like my mother's a teacher, my grandmother's a teacher, aunt and uncle are teachers, my sister's a teacher. Like there's just so many people in education, so it was just kind of like I always felt like music was such a long shot
mm,
that if I never like even when I started my label, like the only reason I started my label was because we tried to get signed, and well, the group that I was with before, we tried to get signed, and that was just a hellish situation. And I wanted people to hear the music, so that was the only reason I started my label. I didn't do it thinking that I'm going to start a business. I just did it like, how can I make people hear my music? Oh, I have to start a business.
mm.
So um, yeah, it took me even after having a label 5 or 6 years before I'm like, oh, maybe I could do this for a living. Like,
Mm.
and I do have, that's one regret I have. I wish I would have gone to school for music or film, but I guess it's not too late. And, I'm not going back to school. Not happening. But
And just from like your lyrical content, I was gonna ask, Were you like reading a lot back then, stuff like that, or?
I wasn't, and that is actually a question I've gotten before.
Mm.
Um, I don't know where it came from, honestly. Like I watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of movies. Um, was never a big reader. I actually hated like creative writing classes. And now thinking back, I'm like, I could have killed those classes. Like I'm a creative guy and I write.
Yeah.
Like that should be the class but I hated it. I hated people telling me what I had to create.
Yeah.
Like, so I guess that was kind of just the rebellious side of wanting or not knowing how to be an artist within the confines of like these rules. Um, but I became a reader later in life. Really, almost in my 30s was when I started reading a bit more. But yeah, I mean, if you listen to my early lyrics, it was all like science fiction,
Mm.
fantasy. Like that was kind of like the stuff that I had grown up on and was kind of obsessed with for a while. Like I was a Star Wars kid that, saw the first Star Wars in the theater and remembers it as like a life-changing experience.
Mm.
So like that definitely seeped into my writing. Um, but now that I think about it, I did read a lot of that kind of stuff. Like I read science fiction novels. I read a lot of fantasy novels, Dungeons and Dragons type of stuff.
Mm.
And so I guess on that side, I was a fairly avid reader.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know if any of that seeped into my later stuff.
Mm.
But for sure,
No, go on. Sorry about that.
no, it's all good. But for sure, it seeped into the center of the web record. Is basically my childhood in hip hop form.
Mm.
Like lots of science fiction references and everything about from Blade Runner to Excalibur to like basically just like walking through a blockbuster video in the fantasy science fiction section in rap form.
A little bit off on my timeline, I think here, but so another pic I seen is in your dorm room. You're talking about De La Soul. I think you're a big De La Soul fan.
They were probably the biggest. Their first album had a huge impact on me, and it's the only album I remember exactly where I was when I bought it. I remember opening the cassette tape. I remember putting it in my car, and I lived maybe a 10-minute drive from Tower Records.
Mm.
And I remember popping the tape in and just driving past my house, getting on the highway. I'm like, I don't want to stop listening to this. And it's a long album. It's like probably a 90-minute album.
Mm.
I just drove around for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just because I didn't want to stop listening. And I don't know if you have the album, but it's got like the comic book inside. And, this is the first time you're hearing skits ever. And like, it's funny and stupid. And I don't know, it was just, it really hit me in a lot of ways. And the sampling was just sampling different things that you're used to hearing sampling. And they were characters that, I don't know, it was just a complete experience in one album. And it definitely blew me away. I was a big De La Soul fan before the album dropped. They had, a couple of singles. Plug Tune In had come out, and I play that to death. And I think they were kind of one of like the big influences on me being like Cryptic. Like I had the name already, but like I didn't always know what the fuck they were talking about. And that was fine. And sometimes I would pick it up, and then a year later I'd listen and be like, oh shit. And that kind of like, gave me that like it's okay that people don't understand what the hell you're talking about. And sometimes you interpret it wrong. Sometimes you'll figure it out the right thing 2 years later or whatever. But as long as it sounds cool and it has something initially simple that pulls you in, it can be as complicated or as personal as you want it to be without laying it out and spelling it out for someone. So that was they definitely were one of the earliest influences of that, because the Plug Tunin single, I still really don't know what the hell they're talking about. Like, and that was, that's 88 or 87 it came out.
So you were already kind of making beats and rapping already when that came out?
Yeah, I was definitely making pause tapes when Plug Tunin came out, and I was rapping. Like the first rapper that made me want to rap was Big Daddy Kane. So I would write raps basically completely biting his style, and they were terrible. And then the De La thing happened, and it was about 6 months to a year after hearing Plug Tuning that I actually started recording raps. And they were definitely heavily De La influence. There's no denying. I actually recently found a cassette of some of those songs that I recorded back then.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and to be real, like, I expected them to be terrible. And they're not great, but they're far better than I ever expected them to be. So I was like, okay, we were onto something. I'll send you a link, because I did post one of them online.
Oh, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I've seen, obviously it's later material than that, but you've actually been releasing a bunch of older stuff.
What's that?
You've kind of been, obviously not as old as that, but you've been releasing some older stuff that you had recorded.
Oh, yeah. I pretty much, like, I have, in my parents' house still, there's, like, crates of cassette tapes that are, none of them are labeled. It's just, it's like this treasure trove of, every time I go there, I take about 20 cassettes back to Brooklyn, and I'll listen to them, and I'm like, okay, there was nothing on those, but every once in a while you'll find, like, oh, this was the first time that I ever met Vordel from Canox. And, everyone that came to my place rhymed, and I recorded everything. So I'm hoping to eventually get through them, but it's a monster task. But as I find things that I think are good enough for people to hear, I certainly will post them online somewhere.
So how did you hook up with the Addams family? Or is that like your creation, or?
No, I was kind of grandfathered into Addams. Tried not to make this too long of a story, but it is kind of a long story. So, all right, so I was in this crew called EBS, Elite Bomb Squad, which, if people Google it, somehow that's another long story, because I know how it leaked, but that leaked on the internet, and our demos out there. But we had broken up, and then I was a solo artist, and I didn't really have an outlet, because me and my friends that were doing it at the time, they were all doing different things, and it was just me in my basement making beats and writing raps and recording for myself. And the only way that I could be heard at the time was that radio shows had this segment towards the end of their show where they would let people call in and rap on the air. And I would call up and rap on the air, and the majority of these shows, the segments of these shows, were the host clowning on the rappers. 90% of them were terrible, like, that's the reality of it. So, number one, it takes a certain level of arrogance to just call up and be like, yeah, they're not going to clown me. So I used to call up, and there was one show in Long Island, Drew Spence. I'm still good friends with the host. I called up, and he was really harsh on people. And that's why you listened, because it was funny. He just cracked jokes while you're rapping, and you can't hear him cracking the jokes, but everyone who's listening to the radio show can hear you getting destroyed. So I called, and I rapped, and it was like a real nerdy science fiction thing, and it just turns out that the host is like a huge Star Trek, Star Wars nerd, which I didn't know. And he loved my stuff, and we just started talking afterwards, and I used to call in every week. And then there was one week I just had like a DJ gig or something, and I didn't call in, and these two guys called in, and they're like, "Yo, everybody that raps on your show sucks except for that kid Cryptic One from Long Island." And I was like, he called me up and told me this, and turns out those guys were Molecule and Witchcraft, which ended up being center of the web with me, and they were in Adam's Family. So it was because of that host that we got linked up, and the host asked me if I had a demo. I lied and said, yeah. He said, "You want to come down and play it?" I was like, sure. So the course of those 2 weeks, I recorded a demo, and I went up there, and I brought Molecule and Witchcraft with me, and we decided to form the group Center of the Web, which they were already in Adam's Family. So I kind of got grandfathered in through knowing them. And at the time, Adams was the original four members is Vast and Vortal, this guy Genesis, who's still rapping, and this guy Osiris, who did he's the artist that did the artwork for the Cannibal Ox album. Okay. So those were the original four. They went to high school together, and I came in maybe a year, no, maybe like 6 months after it was already created. And I look back at it kind of weirdly now, because I guess I was a bit of a control freak to some degree, in that I was like, I saw all this talent, and I was like, yo, you guys, we need to like do more than just rap for each other. Like I wanted people to hear it. So I kind of, in a sense, became the leader of Adam's Family. It wasn't like a conscious decision, or I wasn't voted in. It was just kind of, I had the studio, I had the beats, and I had the vision of like how to release music. So yeah, that was how I got in Adams. And that was 95. So, yeah.
So when you met Vest and Vortal, you could just tell, like you were saying you knew these people had talent.
Well, I was in Adam's Family for a good maybe 4 or 5 months before I even heard or met them. Like I had heard of them. Molecule and Witchcraft would recite some of their rhymes to me, and I'm like, okay, and then randomly, like I was in the city coming from an open mic, and there'd always be ciphers outside, and I was in a cipher, and I just feel this like really tall dude behind me, and I wound up getting into a battle with someone, and the guy behind me starts battling with me against these people, and it turns out that was Vast. And it was like, oh, you're Cryptic. I'm like, that's how I met him. And that was the first time that I heard him rhyme. And just like, Vast just has this presence about him. Number one, he's tall as fuck. He's like 6'10" or something. And he just had this high pitched voice and just this way of rhyming that you never heard before. And it was clever. And I was like, wow, this is something else. And yeah, Vortal, again, like the way he was rhyming then was very different than how he rhymes now, or even on the Cannibal Ox album. Like he was extremely like loud, and like it was almost yelling, and like I like, it's to the point I remember the first lines he ever kicked in front of me because they were just so loud and powerful. We're in the street, and like I'm like, dude, it's like midnight, you're waking up the neighborhood, like, and so that I remember that. And it's weird because you hear people rap in person, you never really know how they're going to sound recorded. But then the first sessions recording with them, I'm like, yo, you guys are on some other shit. Like, we need to take this seriously now. And the same thing with like the Hangar 18 guys, when I met Alaska and Wind and Breeze, and pretty much everyone I met in Adam's family we were of the same kind of cloth. We were weirdos that just loved hip hop, had many of the same influences, a lot of the same experiences, and it was definitely a fun time.
You mentioned open mics. Was that a big thing?
Yeah, specifically one in particular was the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, which is still running to this day. That pretty much was an influence on everyone who's anyone in the New York underground scene, and a lot of people from outside New York scene would go there. It was ground zero for underground hip hop. I could tell you everyone that's performed there. Pretty much just name anyone from the New York underground, they were regulars there. C. Ray's Walls and Poison Pen and Pumpkinhead and like everyone, Cannabis. I saw the first New York performance of Erykah Badu I saw there. Like, it was just, it was just like this really like, and there was no rules. Like, anyone could get up, and most of the people sucked. Like anything, that's just the reality of it is. But then occasionally Mos Def will show up, and you'll be like, oh shit, this is crazy. But no, it was open mics, but what we lived for more than the open mics were the ciphers outside. That's where it really happened. Everyone would go to the shows. Sometimes people would just hang out outside, and there'd be kids with a little radio with beats on it, or somebody beatbox, and ciphers would happen, and we'd go until the police came and made us leave. And that was pretty much, it was a 2 to 3 times a week thing.
Wow. So were you doing much performing live at this point?
Not a huge amount. We'd perform. We really sucked. Like, we really were terrible live. It was hard to figure out how to transfer that to a live setting. And even in the underground scene, we were kind of like the underground scene itself is like a bunch of outcasts. You're cast out from the mainstream of New York hip hop, and then within that, there were outcasts in the outcasts, and we were those guys. Like, we were the weirdos amongst the weirdos. So, we were respected more. Now that I look back at it and I talk to people, we were respected more than I ever thought we were. But I always kind of felt like we were, the fringe of the fringe. And we'd do shows, and we didn't really rehearse, and we didn't really know our lyrics or like know how to like really talk to the crowd and engage the crowd. We didn't figure that out until long after we had many records out, which was detrimental in a lot of ways, obviously, because live performance is it's crucial. But we eventually figured it out, mostly by trial and error, and mostly by going on tour, and you do something enough, you get good at it, But the early days, there were some really brutal shows, like painful memories. I definitely remember one show in particular where we got booed off the stage.
Oh man.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we finished our set, but there were boos,
Mm,
and that's a strange experience to go through,
yeah.
especially when you're a cocky, arrogant young rapper,
Mm.
and you're like, those motherfuckers are not booing me. I'm finishing, you know.
So I guess this is I seen a picture. It's you Aesop LP Murs Blockhead. I said like 2001.
Yeah, those are the Jux days. I don't remember specifically. Like, I don't even remember how I got a hold of that picture. I
Mm,
think someone else posted it online,
mm,
and I don't even know exactly where the picture was taken. But I remember those times very well. It wasn't that long ago. Um, but yeah, the Jux days were. I don't even know how to explain it. It was just. It's kind of like this. You look back at it now and know the significance of it, but while you're going through it, it's just like, oh, these are just my equally weird friends that also
mm,
rap, and like, I don't think, maybe some people did, but I don't think most people really understood how big Jux would become,
mm,
and certainly not like the Canox album was the first full length album released on Jux. Like, Lifted EP before, and then Aesop followed shortly after, and RJ, and then they just had these really eventually iconic albums back to back to back to back.
mm.
And yeah, I don't know. You have a specific question about the picture or just about the era?
Yeah, I guess just about the times, and again, if like when you're with guys like that, if you could just tell like these guys are something else, and
Well, yeah, I mean, LP, I had met him years before, actually at a show that Center of the Web did. The first time I met LP, I was already very familiar with his music. It was in '96.
mm,
I did a show with Center of the Web, and it was Company Flow, Juggernauts, and us at this venue called the Wetlands. And I met him after. I remember specifically that this was right when it was before Fun Crusher Plus came out, and it was when the week that the single Population Control had dropped.
mm.
And I remember because he asked me if I heard it. It was my first time meeting, and I was like, yeah. And he's like, which song do you like better? And I was like, I was like, Info Kill, and I was like, really. Now looking back, like, Population Control is obviously the better song, but I was like, Info Kill, but it was because I already heard Population Control because Bobito played it on a show and I recorded it and I played it to death. So Info Kill was new to me. So like that was my first time meeting LP, but I was way familiar. Like, most people know Company Flow from Fun Crusher Plus, but there was Fun Crusher that came out before that, maybe a year or two before they were on Raucous. It was just an EP. It's mostly the same songs, like Vital Nerve was on there, and they're big songs. But I was already a big Company Flow fan, so just meeting them was like, you had little moments of being starstruck back then, and that was one of the earlier starstruck moments, was meeting LP at that show. And yeah, I mean, you knew they were dope, but you didn't think that it was going to blow up into this huge thing. I don't think anyone saw it. There was always kind of that sense of, and it wasn't just with them, it was with a lot of artists that didn't blow up. You'd hear their music and you were like, wow, people need to hear this, but they probably never will, and somehow there was just a perfect storm, and the Jux thing happened, and people actually got to hear it on a fairly large scale, which was a lot because of what Company Flow did with the Raucous era. That it really did change the face of independent hip hop in New York, at least.
Mm. And you were so I guess you're like pretty heavy into rapping and producing at this time, like the early 2000s.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was rapping, producing. My label CP Records was pretty much in a good place in the 2000s. Like that was, a lot of it was helped by Jux because I had recorded stuff with Aesop, I'd recorded tons of stuff with Can Ox,
Mm.
and I had stuff ready to release, and then Def Jux happened, and they blew up. So, just by luck, those releases kind of piggyback on the success of Jux. And yeah, I mean, I like 2001. I was actually like my first solo album, Anti-Moby Strip Theory, didn't come out until 2004,
Mm.
but it was done in 2000.
Okay. Yeah, because
Like,
I seen there was a couple dates for various places I looked.
yeah, it was released in 2004. It was completed in 2000. The entire plan that I had for Adam's Family, which didn't come into fruition, was once I knew that they were signed to Jux, I kind of felt this was before Jux was blowing up, and you could just kind of sense that it was going to be something at least bigger than anything we had done before.
Mm.
So the entire thing was to try and be like, how can Adam's Family, since Cannibal Ox is part of Def Jux and part of Adam's Family, how can Adam's Family benefit from it? And the whole plan was to have everyone in Adam's Family, at the time it was 8 of us, and release something in 2001, because that's when the Can Ox album came out. I was going to release my album. Hangar 18 was going to do their album. Just One Art was doing his album. And we wanted just to have a constant flow of Adam's Family related releases after Cold Vein. And I wound up losing my distribution deal for my label in 2000. And then it was just kind of like, it literally took me 4 years to figure out that situation and how I was going to release these records. And so that's what caused the delay. And I made a lot of bad choices that definitely could have changed the trajectory of a lot of those releases. But in the end, it is what it is. But yeah, I was definitely rapping in those times. That was like the heart of me, like really trying to do a solo record, was when Can Ox started recording with LP. I was like, actually, before they started recording with LP, I shut my studio off. I was like, I need to get this solo record done. No one can come to the studio for 6 months.
Mm.
And that was kind of when they wound up linking up with LP, and I was like, great. And that's when Hangar linked up with DJ Paul, which I was like, this is great. I felt responsible because literally, like, the first studio, the only studio that Vast and Vortal had ever recorded in was with me.
Mm.
Same thing with Wind and Breeze. I think Alaska had done some stuff, but like a lot of the Addams Family guys, they didn't know any other place to record, which puts a lot of, not pressure, but it's a big burden on me. I'm working on everybody else's stuff, and I had this solo record in my head that I needed to get out. So I shut the studio down, and everyone kind of found a way, out of necessity, to record music, which actually worked out great for everyone. But yeah, I mean, that was basically it. The Jux times were definitely it was probably the most fun I had in the music world.
Mm.
Just because you were constantly going to shows, and the shows would be packed, and you'd be hanging out with people that you looked up to in a lot of ways, and became they became your peers, and it wasn't just about hip hop. We'd go hang out. We'd go a lot of drinking. There was a lot of non-rap related drinking going on in those days for sure. And it was fun. And like I've always kind of had, it's something I haven't talked about, but I've always kind of had this hub in my little home in Long Island where rappers from other parts of the country would come to my crib and either record or just hang out. And I really don't know how that even started, but I was just reminded of it recently. Like this week, Alaska tweeted a song that I did with, I don't know how familiar you are with like Anacon guys, like Soul and Dose One and Alias and those guys. So we had done a song with them. This was 96, maybe 97. And Alaska posted the song because it's on YouTube, because everything's on YouTube. And, all those guys retweeted, and we were just talking about that session. I completely forgot. There was like maybe 25 people in my house. This is my parents' house. I'm like, my parents were fucking really patient with me. Like, I just had these people from Ohio, from Maine, just literally people sleeping on every inch of the floor in my room, in my sister, I call it my sister's room, but she hadn't lived there for years. But, there's 30 people in my house at once. And these people went on to do to be like a big movement. Yeah. And there are lots of people like that. Like Esoteric stayed at my crib. Him and Virtuoso. L had been out there. Aesop. We mixed Labor Days there. It was just kind of this strange time. And looking back on seeing the success that all these people have had, it's kind of cool.
How did you kind of become that guy that where people come to you for recording and stuff? Did you just take it more seriously than?
I think a lot of it was just by default. I had the equipment. I knew how to record. And also I was one of the first people I knew to be involved in the internet. Like that's the reality of it. That's how I met. That's how I met Esoteric, was on the internet. Despot, Low Deck, like a lot of these guys I met like literally in the AOL chat room.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like I met so many of them through that, and we just became friends online. And the people that lived in New York were like, "Yo, we're going here. Let's hang out, or you want to come record?" Or that's how I met a lot of these guys. And I really don't know how I became that. I was down to record with pretty much anyone, and I wasn't charging. I really just wanted to record with people who I thought were dope. And that's just kind of how it happened.
Do you remember what you were using in the studio around that time?
What era are we talking? Like 2000?
Yeah, I guess like the
Jux era. I was using a Roland VS 880, and then I graduated to the 1680, which is it's a hard drive. It's a hardware unit, but it's a hard drive recorder, an 8-track, and then I moved up to the 16-track, and then I switched to Pro Tools, I think in 2000, and yeah, that was just as far as recording. As far as like making beats, I was using an ASR 10. I was one of the first people I know to start sequencing on a computer. I used a program called Vision, and this was before you could record audio on computers. You could just record MIDI. Like computers just weren't powerful enough to do it yet. And so that's basically what I used. The center of the web stuff was done on like a reel to reel. And before that, it was 4 tracks. But no, I definitely remember all of the equipment by era. But it was always, I'd always want to improve the sound, and I was always the gear. I had a serious gear lust, where I would drool over every new advertisement I saw in a magazine, and like, how am I gonna afford this? And figure out a way to either get it or get something similar. Which thankfully, that in the past 10 years has died, because that shit will keep you broke.
I think now I've seen you're using the M Audio Axiom Pro 61.
Mm-hmm.
And you used the M Audio before, the Oxygen 25.
Yep.
What kind of made you change from like hard, like I think you also had or still have a Korg Triton.
Oh God, yeah. Wow, you saw all those pictures. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I still own the Triton. I still own the ASR 10. They're literally sitting in my parents' house collecting dust. Because I live in a small apartment in Brooklyn, and space is of a huge concern. But what made me make the switch really was I had a hiatus from music, where I was like, fuck music, I'm done with this shit. And I literally stopped making music for almost 4.5 years, like 4 years or so. And then I decided to get back into it, and I just wanted to kind of change everything about how I did it. So I bought Logic for my Mac, and I was like, I need a controller. Let me get a controller, and I'm just going to keep it that simple. My controller, my software, and that's it. And I'm going to learn to make beats in that way, and then see what I need from there. And that was just how it started. That was a good 6 years ago, 7 years ago now. And I really haven't changed that much at all. I did grab my 950 from my parents' house, so I have that here. But yeah, I have a turntable, I have my vinyl, Logic, my Axiom, and that's all I'm using right now.
When you stepped away and then came back, did it take you a while to get back into it, or was it just kind of like there?
No, it was like, I kind of thought that it would take a while, but it was just there. It was really just about me learning the software, than actually like the music side of it. I came back into it and didn't want to use samples, because I felt like that was the biggest departure from what I had done, and that was like the biggest challenge. So I basically went 2 years where every beat I made, I didn't use samples outside of drums. I'd still sample drums. And no, it was pretty quick. Like, some of the first beats I made coming back wound up in the Adult Rappers film. Like, literally the first 3 beats I made are in the film. One of them is like the main title score. So yeah, I jumped right back into it. And even in my break, like, my break was really hardcore, to the point where I was so mad at like the music business that I didn't even want to listen to music. So like, I just didn't listen to music. I was like, all right, I'm just going to watch movies and TV, just cut this entire section of my life off. And then there were a few things that happened that I heard that kind of like made me want to get back into it. So that's when I started researching it. And I landed on Logic because I've always been an Apple guy, and I knew I didn't want to do Pro Tools. Like, I loved Pro Tools for what it was, but Pro Tools was kind of, this is my perception of Pro Tools. It was kind of more geared towards recording than towards creating. And I felt like Logic was a little more geared towards creating and less recording. And I just wanted to be in a purely creative space. I didn't know where the music I was going to be working on ended up. This was purely hobby for me. I wanted it to be as creative as possible and less worrying about like mixing and the sound of it and all this other shit, which by default, just because of how I'm wired, I wind up worrying about anyway. But no, I'm glad that was the path. I really love Logic, and I wouldn't switch it for anything right now. Although I have been messing with Ableton Live lately, which is an interesting toy.
Because you seem to get a lot done. You do that 100 beats a day, so like you pretty much make music every day.
Yeah. This year I've been a little slacking. Like the first year I did it, I was like every day, and I literally went like, I think I did like 55 or 60 days without a day off, and then, you know, not to get morbid, but a friend of mine passed away. Actually, I mentioned him. My friend whose brother was the cool kid, he passed away in the midst of me doing that, and I was like, all right, I need to take a break. So I took like 3 weeks off, and then I finished it. But this year, I've been a little more lax with it, mainly because of I can make music every day. Like I've gotten into a rhythm where I could get off this call with you, turn on my stuff, and an hour later I'll have something. You know, I just train myself. But the beat a day thing also has the video element, and that's the shit that I struggle with. like it should be called video a day, because that's the hard part.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, even outside of music, I was gonna ask, just like kind of remind me of, or made me think of, I don't know if you're familiar with Joe Rogan, the comic and the.
yeah, of course.
But
The MMA stuff.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, like I listen, like how he gets so much stuff done, and like you kind of see, and again, this is just from like social media and stuff, but you know, you seem to be have some interest in like film, photography, cooking, you're flying drones.
Yeah, oh, yeah. These are all my things for sure. Yeah, as far as like the video stuff, like, I don't want to say before music, but like, I never thought I'd be a musician. I thought I'd be working in film or movies or something like a visual art of something before music. So that was really like my first goal. And it just so happened that music was a little cheaper to do, you know, so like cheaper to buy turntables than it is to buy a film camera, you know, like, you know, and get film developed and like deal with that shit. So I'd always kind of had my eye around it and was waiting for the technology to catch up to the point where it was affordable. And that's when I bought a camera. But yeah, I just like to make shit. Like that's the reality of it. Like when I talked about the hiatus I took from music, that's when the cooking happened. Like looking back, I realize now that I needed to create something, and that's what I latched onto. And I found a lot of similarities in making food as making beats. So it just was kind of the perfect fit. And then I realized that I did not want to do that shit for a living. so I went back to music. Yeah, because the restaurant world, as someone who knows a bunch of chefs, I would never wish that life on anyone. Like they need to make a documentary. I'm sure there probably is a documentary about the reality of the restaurant world. But that is a cesspool that I'd prefer not to swim in.
In September, you released an album, "The World According to." It was a lot shorter than the Anti-Mobius strip theory.
Yep.
Is there a reason for that? Or
Yeah, I mean, the way that album even happened, like I feel weird even calling it an album.
mm,
Um, it was literally just like how I'd started the Beat a Day thing. I was doing verse of the week, where I'd
mm,
write a verse, I'd record it, and shoot a video for it, and every week I'd drop it. And I did that for maybe 5 weeks, and I kind of ran out of video ideas, but I just kept recording stuff.
mm,
And by week 10, I'm like, I should put this out there. You know, it's just sitting here on my hard drive. So I'm like, you know, I've proven to myself that in a very short period of time, I could record something that I like and feels worth releasing.
mm,
So it was, the entire idea of it was just to be kind of like an in-between thing in between larger albums and projects, that I was just going to drop this World According To thing. And it kind of caught on, so I kind of pushed it as a real release more.
mm,
And now it's a thing, you know, like I'm currently working on the second part of that. Almost done with it, actually, which I'm hoping to get it out in the next 2 to 3 months. But I am also working on a full-length album that's closer to like the scope of Mobius. But there are a few reasons why I kind of prefer the short thing, because everyone's attention span is non-existent, including mine. Like I don't know if albums are just not as good as they used to be, but I don't listen to albums like I used to. You know, like I don't buy an album, flip through the liner notes, because there are no liner notes, number one. It's just a download. And sit there and listen to the whole thing, and then it's just in my headphones nonstop. It's very rare that happens, and I don't know if that's because the music is not as impactful as it used to be, or if my attention span just isn't there. And I'm pretty sure it's my attention span. Like, it's just, it's the age of the internet, and you know, I can't blame the musicians. I can't blame the fans. It's just the way it is. So if I do, and I am working on a longer album, when I do that, it's going to be because I have something like that's a larger thing that I need to say or I need to get out. But I really enjoy the quick turnaround of a small project. Like, I work on it, I finish it, I put it out there, and then I start working the next thing. You know, Mobius, that was like years of recording and removing songs, changing songs, and editing, and you know, it doesn't get released in 2001 when I wanted it to, and over the 3 years of me trying to get it released, I wind up like hating it, as most artists, you know, you hate your old shit because it's not the new shit you're working on. So these little projects kind of give you that way of like, I'm releasing stuff while it's still fresh to me, and I still like it. So it was a new experience for me, and I kind of like it. So the plan is to do them fairly regularly, every 3 to 6 months, to drop like a quick little EP like that. But yeah, go ahead.
From what I've heard of your other stuff, this album seemed a bit more political, and
Yep.
so was that like a big reason for you were like, I need to release this, or?
No, like, that wasn't a reason that I released it. It just kind of, where, like, the album that I did that I recorded in 2005 was also very political. It's called Truth, but that didn't come out until 10 years later, because that was when I left the music business. I had an album done, and I'm like, all right, fuck the music business, and that album just sat. But you know, like, everything changed post 9/11. Like that's the reality of it. That's specifically the event that made everything change for me, and that's when politics seeped into my music more and more. I definitely, it's important to me, and anything that's important to me ends up in my music in one way or another. I don't want to be like a political MC that's all I do. But you know, it's definitely there. It's in the next couple of projects I have. There's definitely a lot of political content. But you know, this is the world we're living in right now. So there's a lot going on in politics at the moment.
But I seen the album on like several like best of year-end list on like hip hop blogs, and
Yep.
also the movie Adult Rappers I've seen get some shout outs. Has that helped like reaffirm you doing this again?
Oh yeah, like Adult Rappers was a huge. I can't even express like how much that movie, just the me going there for the interview, doing the score for it, like all that is what made me get back into making music. Period. Like he hit me up to do the interview. I was still very bitter about the music industry. I was like, yeah, I have a lot to say. I'm coming. Let me come in and talk about hip hop. Yes, let me warn people, don't do this shit for a living. You know, so that was the start of it. And then he he hit me up. Because of the film, I got back in touch with some of the Addams Family guys that I hadn't spoken to in years, and specifically Alaska. And he had asked if we wanted to do a song for the soundtrack. And I had already started making beats again, but I didn't tell anybody. And, I sent those beats, and literally me, Alaska, and Wind recorded a song. And then it just became, we remembered why we were good friends, why we did this together. And that's when the Addams Sand album started getting recorded. So that was all because of the film. And I had sent him a beat for the film. He asked if I had any beats that he could use for it. And he was like, oh, you have any more? And just like I did with the demo, I was like, yeah, I have plenty more. And I didn't. And I just stayed in front of my computer and made beats for like 3 weeks. I was like, here's more. And he wound up using like most of them. And, and I just kept making stuff since then, and I haven't stopped. So like, yeah, that film was even, this was well before it was released, well before it was finished. But that film was instrumental in me just being back around these people that, like, that's one of the big things I miss about the old days was the community aspect of it. Is like you're hanging out with people that, we're all adults now. Everyone has their lives that are very separate from each other. But at the time, I spent every day with rappers. Like there's no better way to get influence to create than to be around creative people all day. So this kind of got me back in that world, which got the creative juices flowing again for sure.
You're selling beats now and doing feature verses.
I am. This is true. Guilty. which is something. I mean, I've always sold beats on the side. It's a very different world now. There was always something about it that kind of rubbed me the wrong way artistically. That, I always just wanted to make music that I wanted to hear. And at some point, becoming an adult, you realize that and this is going to crush a lot of people's dreams, but the reality of it is the music you make, it's not for you. Like, if it was for you, you wouldn't let anyone hear it, right? Yeah, the actual creation is for me, and especially with my writing, that's for me. But when you can separate that from it a bit and realize that you don't have to like everything that you do, then it opens you up to do more. The beat a day kind of just making music every day made me accept that I'm not gonna like everything that I do. I'm not gonna love everything I do. I shouldn't say like, because I don't. There's nothing I do that I despise or hate, but there will be beats that I'm like, I kind of rushed that. It's okay, but it's done. Let me put it out, and then those beats will get all the attention or the likes, or be the first to sell. And like, what the fuck do I either I have shitty taste, or like I am totally out of touch with what people want to hear. But it makes you see things in a different light, you know. And I should have learned that early on, because there were beats that I did, like, for instance, Vast, the song Adversity Strikes. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that was his biggest song before Canox. It was kind of instrumental in Canox kind of happening. And I hated that beat.
Really?
Hated it. I made it. I tried to do a solo song on it, and it didn't work out. And then some other rapper came to my crib and wanted to use it. We did a song. It was like 4 or 5 songs before Vast touched it. And when Vast recorded that, because of what he did with it, it gave it a new life. And I was like, wow, this is what this needed. Now I love this. But, you know, it's just this weird relationship you have with your music. But back to selling beats, me being able to separate myself from it enables me to like sell it to whoever wants to buy it. Like, whoever, you know, I may not like whoever buys it. And like, as an artist, that's a tough thing to accept.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's fine. I hate saying this because it sounds like a negative thing, but it's music is kind of disposable in a sense that I can make it. Back in the days, I'd make 10 beats a year. You know, like now I can make 10 beats in a week and not sacrifice quality. But you know, it just comes down to personal taste sometimes. You know, I don't like. I'm the pickiest person when it comes to the music I listen to. So for me to expect every rapper that raps over my beats to be something that I would listen to, it's insane. It's not the reality of it. Now, with that said, I still work with a lot of people that I really do like their stuff. But once you open yourself up to the public, like, hey, everyone, I'm selling beats.
Yeah.
You're bound to get some people that you don't care for their stuff. And that's fine. You know, I am totally fine with that now. My younger self would never in a million years have done that.
Go ahead.
You couldn't have paid me enough. Seriously, you could have offered me whatever lump sum money. I'm like, nah, you suck, dude. Like, move on.
And maybe you already have, but I was just going to ask if you could touch on something you said in the Adult Rappers documentary, and that was about turning down opportunities and keeping it real.
Oh, yeah. Just various situations in my life. Like, it's become a common theme, oddly enough. I didn't realize how important in my world he was, but my friend who passed away, who was the older brother of the guy who had the sampler and all that stuff, he was very into the music industry. He was managing Nerd, you know, Pharrell Williams. He was managing the Clips. Like, this is before they were huge. They were just starting to pick up, and he loved my music, and he'd always like hound me like, yo, when are you gonna give me? And this is back in, late '90s, where our entire mantra was "fuck mainstream music," and we were just hard-headed idiots. And yeah, I mean, I'd been in the studio and see Pharrell working on stuff. And I'm like, fuck these guys, mainstream motherfuckers. And I'm like, if that was now, I think I'd have a bit more of an adult approach to that situation. But that's one of plenty of keeping it real goes wrong moments. But live and learn, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's it. Thank you so much for doing this.
No problem at all, man.
And would you like to know where people can find your stuff?
Yeah. Most of my stuff is on Instagram. It's Cryp Uno. That's CRYP_UNO on Instagram. Pretty much the same thing on Twitter, Cryp_Uno. Those are my main places. You could check me on Facebook too. Cryptic1.net exists as well, but that's kind of just there to reinforce the social media stuff. If you want to download all my music while it's still free, because I really don't know how long that's going to last, because literally everything is free except physical merchandise. You could check the Bandcamp. That's cryptic1.bandcamp.com. And ONE spelled out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Bunch of new music in store. Beat Today is still going. I have to make my beat for the day when I get off the phone and figure out what the hell I'm going to shoot a video of today.